Hi, I'm Drew, and I'm an amateur model builder. I'm building a layout in my basement called the White River Line, inspired by the Frisco Railroad in the Ozarks. In this episode, I'm going to be taking a break from the workbench and headed back over to the layout where I'm going to be working on some track plan. If you've been following along, you've seen that I've had several iterations of my track plan along the way, as well as several iterations of this bench work. I've spent months and months working on this track plan. The pattern seems to be that, well, I work on the track plan for a little bit, I take a break and come back to it, and there's just something about it that I'm not quite happy with. And the reality is that as I go along, even as I'm laying track, I may make changes to this track plan. So what I thought I'd do is, now that I've got my bench work all set out, I'm going to roll out some paper onto the bench work and just temporarily draw up a plan. Just see in real life how everything is going to fit together and work. That way I can make any changes that I need to and get to a track plan that I'm happy with. My butcher paper is only 18 inches wide, so I had to add a little extra for the 21-inch deep sections. These T-pins should come in handy later too when I lay down the roadbed and the track. I feel pretty fortunate to have a roll of this butcher paper lying around. We've got 2 rolls actually. Not quite sure how that happened. So now that I've got all the paper laid out here on the layout, I'm ready to start drawing in the track plan, seeing what adjustments I might want to make. But before I get into that, I wanted to walk you through the track plan that I currently have, as well as talk about some of the changes I might want to make to this track plan. So starting in this section behind me that's represented here on the left side of the track plan, I've got my rail yard. I've got the ladder system here. I have a very large siding that comes around. I've got some engine service that's right here as well. This siding will serve as a switching lead for the rail yard, as well as coming on into my urban area that's in here. In this urban area, I have a small spur that could service an industry or function as a team track. Moving along in the clockwise direction, over here, that'll be on the left side of the layout, I have my urban area. In the urban area, I have a siding as well that can service some of the small industries that might be in a small urban town. I've built my mill for this purpose. I might consider putting a team track in here or something like that so that we can have access for my urban industries. In addition, I have this branch that goes off to simulate access to the outside world, to maybe an interchange somewhere. I can spot cars along here to pick up and to bring into my main system here. I'm planning on having some elevation change in this area too. My plan right now is to have the elevation change being on the main line around here, and that this branch goes underneath it with a trestle bridge. Moving on around into the industrial area, I've got a feed mill that's going to be here. I've got a milling, like a lumber mill that's going to be here. I may rework some of this track plan in here, I'm not quite sure. Now, thinking about some of the changes that I might want to make to this track plan, I'm thinking about adding a third track here to the engine service area. The cooling tower kit that I'm going to put together has actually service for 3 different lines on it. So in my urban area and my rural area, I'm actually thinking about switching these 2 places. This is the area that I really want to do quite a bit of work and experimentation with. Here in the industrial area, I'm actually thinking about trying to put a Y in here, see if I can squeeze that in so that I have some place for my engines to be able to turn around. I may also make some changes just in general to this area. That's the plan as I have it, and those are some of the changes that I might make. I'm going to go ahead and jump on into some of the laying out of the track plan here at real size, and to see in real life what I can make work. I started by laying out the tangent or straight track for the main line using simply a ruler and a yardstick. The center line for these tracks will be 2 or 3 inches from the edge, although I may look at adjusting this distance as I go along. So now that I have the tangent track laid out, I want to talk to you about some of the tools I'll be using for the curves along the corners of the layout. Now, tangent tracks are pretty straightforward. All I really needed was my ruler, my pencil, and my yardstick. They're just straight lines after all. But the curves can get a little bit trickier. One of the first tools I have here is, well, basically a large compass. This is some leftover scrap from the benchwork build. I've got a hole drilled on one side that my pencil will fit into, and then I've got a series of holes that I've drilled out on the other side that are the links or the radiuses of the curves that I might be using in the layout. So aside from this, well, compass, I've got some cardboard templates for easements. Now, if you don't know what easements are, that's okay. I'll describe those in a little more detail as I lay out these curves. But these cardboard templates that I got will help draw those easements so that we don't have such a sharp change from the tangent track into the curves. The center point for these curves are in the aisles. I adapted one of my tripods for the compass. It's just a finish nail on a bit of scrap wood stuck with double stick tape on top. I then did my best to set my tripod in the correct spot and drew my 24-inch radius curve. Well, this isn't as precise as I had hoped, so I guess I need some more practice. I'll erase this and start over. I spent more time than I'd like to admit trying to get this method right. In the end, I decided just to make some templates from this fiberboard. I made several for different radiuses I might use. Now let's talk about easements. As I mentioned earlier, easements essentially ease the track from a straight line into a curve. This helps to reduce the likelihood of derailments and makes the lines more graceful. Ron at Ron's Trains and Things has an excellent video explaining the geometry of easements, and I'll provide a link to that at the end of the video and in the description below. There are several methods for creating easements. The method I'm about to demonstrate and the templates I use can be found in Paul Mallory's Track Work Handbook. Regardless of what method you use, you always place the curved portion of the track inside the tangent track. This template lists that distance for you. I drew my 24-inch radius curves 9/64 of an inch from the tangent track. Once the tangent track and the curve are drawn, you place the PT, point of tangency, on the tangent track and slide it along the track until the radius mark meets up with the curved portion from the track. Then you trace along the template for your easement. With the main line in place, I started laying out the rail yard. One of the suggestions in John Armstrong's Track Planning for Realistic Operations is to create a set of standards for your railroad, and he provides a list of suggested standards, which I pretty much follow. One of these standards is the center line distance between lines of track. My standard is 2 1/4 inches for the main line and 2 inches everywhere else. I offset the siding that starts here in the yard 2 1/4 inches from the main line. I also laid out this siding through the curve onto the top of the layout. It was now time to employ the next template I've made. This template is for a number 5 turnout. For simplicity's sake, all of my turnouts are number 5s. I made a small notch for the center line of the straight track of the turnout, and I cut the divergent track for the turnout along its center line. This will allow me to precisely line up this template along the straight line and then trace in the divergent track. With the first turnout in place for the siding, I began to lay out the track for the ladder in the yard. Again, these tracks are 2 inches on center. I did add a 5th track. This will serve as a RIP track, a repair in place track, and it will connect to the engine service area. After I placed the first track for this ladder, I got a little stumped on how to line up the remaining switches. The straight track for the remaining switches will connect to the divergent track for the initial turnout into the yard. I really didn't have a reference to line up my template on. Well, I'm going to call it a night, and maybe the answer will come to me in my sleep. Returning to this puzzle the next morning, I realized I could line up the center lines of the divergent track from the end of the first turnout on one end and along the line I had drawn for the next track in the ladder. Marking the end of the straight track from the template, I could line up the next turnout in the ladder. And so on. With the ladder now in place, I moved on to the track for the engine service area. The spacing of the track in this area is going to be dependent on the spacing needs for the coaling tower that I'm going to build. I went ahead and made a template for the coaling tower so I could move that around on the layout and get a good idea of where approximately I wanted it to go. After figuring out this placement, I drew in the lines for the service engine area. Having added in an additional line for the rip track and an additional line for the engine service, the track plan changed from this to this. One last piece before moving on, I marked the spot of the switch point for all of these turnouts. I need to make sure that the placement of the joists for the benchwork don't interfere with the placement of the switch machines I'll be installing underneath the layout later. Fortunately, for this side of the benchwork, I won't need to make any changes to these joists. Next, I began messing around with the top portion of the layout, seeing if I could change it from the urban area into the rural area. I began by moving some structures over that I've built for it. A lot of this work was just kind of staring at the layout and loosely sketching ideas. I cut a strip of fiberboard to play around with the curves for this area. In the end, I shortened the siding and put in a turnout to a branch that would lead off to the wider world. There's a spur from that branch that will serve a team track near the mill and the corrugated building. The White River will flow from here on the left across to the right, where the tracks for the branch will follow it off the layout. An elevation change will begin here on the left side, leading up to a bluff. The main line will be on top of the bluff, where the river is down below. As the main line curves around, it will cross a trestle bridge, passing over the branch and the river below. Moving to the right side of the layout, I began tinkering around here as well. The difficulty that I'm running into is I'm going to be at about 2 1/3 inches here. When my rural area comes in through here, well, I'm going to need a passing siding. I'm wanting to have an extra spur to service an industry. Well, if all of this area is moving down this grade towards here, so that as I get closer to this corner, that I have the proper elevation back to bench level. These sidings and these spurs potentially are going to be on grades. The possible solution that I'm looking at is actually elevating this up to that level and then having these spurs up here while the main line goes back behind this direction in a cut or something like that behind there. The train on the main line here will not be visible, but it'll be visible here. I'm still trying to work through exactly how I want to solve all of these problems. Probably what I'm going to do is just sketch out a few things here and see what works and see what doesn't. I decided to make my town on a plateau and have the main line head back down the grade to bench level before it rounds the corner. But before it heads down that grade, a branch will come off into the town on the plateau. There will be a large siding. And an additional spur to service an industry, probably a feed mill. I will place my depot somewhere along the siding. The branch will then go off the bottom of my layout, crossing over the main. With that figured out, I moved on to the industrial area. Let's see if I can fit a Y into this area. My minimum radius for urban industrial areas is 15 inches, but I'd like to keep it to 18 if possible. A lot of this shuffling around depends on the placement of the turnout for the Y in the peninsula. I actually started by drawing the primary tracks that will be in this area. I drew it on an angle to make it a little bit longer and to add a little bit more visual interest. It also places the number 5 turnout at an angle that almost simulates a true Y turnout. From there, I messed around with a couple of my bendy cardboard curves to see where I could place the turnout along that primary line of the tracks. An 18-inch radius curve isn't really going to work and give me the room that I need. Using 15-inch radius, I've got pretty good easements for these curves. Once this was sorted, I played around with a few different arrangements. One thing I was mindful of was eliminating S-curves as much as possible. They're often a point of derailment. Placing a bit of straight track in the middle of an S-curve helps to ameliorate that problem. In this final plan for the industrial area, I should have space for 3 different businesses. I have a rather large lumber and millwork kit bash project in mind, but a couple of smaller industries should fit here too. With this final or finalish track plan completed, I'm ready to glue my foam in place and make some final adjustments to benchwork. Heck, I might even get ambitious and build the liftgate too. So, that's what I'll be working on next time. Please leave me a like below. It's the best way you can help to support my channel. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook, and those links are in the description below. Thanks for joining me for this episode, and please join me again next time as I continue modeling the White River Line.